Well, welcome back, Beans Army, to another episode of the Less is More Sports Podcast, the college offseason podcast, where you could say we're less of the regular season, but more of the offseason. It's officially that time. We have officially the last weekend without college football, which means this is the last official episode of the football offseason portion of our podcast. Kind of a bittersweet moment. And on today's episode, as we did a few weeks back, we did our all-time college football fantasy draft. But for this episode, we're going to do something similar, but it's only going to be made of players that are going to be playing in the 2023 college football season. Matt and I will do our best to assemble the best fantasy team we possibly can, but at the end of the day, we're just going to have fun with it. You know what? And after the episode concludes, we're going to post both teams and you all let us know who made the best roster. And for those watching at home, our format is, pretty standard non-PPR fantasy football that is made up of a quarterback, two running backs, two receivers, a flex option, a tight end, a defense, and a kicker. And per usual, since I dominate the intro, my man Matt is coming in with the number one
Oh no.
overall pick. So Matt, in the
Oh no.
2023 college football fantasy draft, who is your number one overall pick?
I just realized I forgot the kicker.
That's okay.
But my number one overall pick, yes. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody who my number one overall pick is. It's going to be interesting to see if he's the number one overall pick in the real draft come June, April, whenever that is. But I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State. 2022, 16.4 yards for rec, 1,263 yards, 14 touchdowns, 77 total rec. I mean, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback for Ohio State. I think we've all decided that there are two powers that are going to catch the ball this year in college football. One of them is Marvin Harrison Jr. And there's also a little bit of homerism because, as you know, we are Colts fans, and it would be nice maybe to bring Marvin Harrison Jr. to the place where his dad lit up the scoreboards in
Run that shit
Indianapolis.
back,
So
Ursay.
I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Run that shit
I
back,
feel like we
Ursay.
should make him. If
We
he can,
need to. He
if
needs to
he can
sell
afford
those.
to go get a whale in SeaWorld,
I think he needs to sell
what
one of his guitars.
he could, or he could. If we can afford to go airmail a killer whale from Florida, we can afford to acquire Marvin Harrison Jr. by any means necessary. We can do it, Jim. But in college, we all know he's going to be the dominant force, the best wide receiver in the game. He's paired with some really good weapons too that help take the pressure off a little bit. I know he's not playing with Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud anymore, but still, it doesn't matter who Ohio State's got in a quarterback. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a dominant force. I adore him, and he is going to be my number one overall pick.
You know what's really ironic about this? Those who watch the show refer to Matt as the mid-major guy, whereas I'm the big school guy.
Mm-hmm.
But for our number one overall picks, we kind of flip-flopped. We kind of switched narratives because Matt went with the big school, the big name. Well, hell, the son of an NFL legend. And I'm going with my first overall pick. I'm going with a player that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, and I definitely don't think enough people are talking about. And this guy almost rushed for 1,000 yards as a true freshman.
Oh,
He's going to have a much bigger role in the offense this year. And watching their spring game, he is going to be a vital part of that offense. And as you all know, it is not a Less is More Sports football episode without shouting out Boise State. My number one overall pick is Ashton Jeanty. Let's go.
ooh. I love that pick. I'm not gonna lie because he was actually on. I have a big board. I took this very seriously. I have a big board, and now I'm facing a conundrum on it because I'm facing the old NFL GM question. Do I take the best player available or do I stick to my draft plan? And you know what? There comes a time where even a guy like me has to say, I love you, UL Lafayette. I love you, UL Monroe. I love you, Western Kentucky. But Les, I'm going to use my tight end pick now because I'm going to pick from Georgia. Arguably the number 2 overall weapon in the world, Brock Bowers. Let's look at his 2022 stats. This kid is insane. 64 rec, 15 yards per rec, 942 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And yes, I know it's another situation where the quarterback situation is getting a little bit more fluid. But if you need a security blanket, you might as well take the guy who's probably going to be a top 10 pick in Brock Bowers if you're Carson Beck. So I'm going with Brock Bowers, number 2 overall for my draft. Even though mid-majors, don't get me wrong, your time will come. There are many of you on the board, so I'm going to go with him. Unless you look confused, did I get the wrong stats?
No, not at all. No, I was actually just looking up, my draft board just to see what I'm planning on doing next because, absolutely Brock Bowers is a phenomenal pick. I mean, at the college level, I don't even know if it's fair to even say he's just a tight end, just all the ways Georgia uses him. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. I know that's his position. I mean, you could have. I mean, that like they use him all over the field. I mean, he's one of the more versatile players in college football. I mean, I love versatile players. I mean, a couple years back, just a little story on me, I was a big fan of the idea of Jabril Peppers potentially winning the Heisman the year Lamar Jackson won it. I mean, the dude played like 11 positions that year. I mean, he played both sides of the ball, all 3 sides of the ball. Yeah, he was amazing. And Brock Bowers obviously he's still doing well. And Brock Bowers obviously isn't as versatile as that, but still very versatile and especially really versatile as a tight end, in which Matt, you say you're not experienced with fantasy football, but you're kind of showing that you know a little bit more than what you thought because versatility absolutely matters in fantasy football. So,
I tried that with this draft. We'll see how it goes. But Les, your number 2 pick.
My number 2 pick. And this is where we get back to the big schools. But ironically, I'm going with a player that plays on a team that I'm notorious for not being high on. And my number 2 pick, I'm keeping it with the running back position. And I'm going to go with a player that is pretty much was the offense last season for his respective team. And a player that I still think is going to play a big role in the offense this year and maybe even having a larger role in the receiving game. And that is the college version of Christian McCaffrey, Will Shipley.
I like that pick. I mean, Cade, I can't ever pronounce this guy's name.
Cade Klubnik.
Klubnik's going to be relying a lot on him being a big part of that offensive machine. So I think he'll have a really good season too.
This pick was between either him or Raheem Sanders for Arkansas, who I also think is going to be a very good running back. Mm-hmm. But I think what it came down to is that Shipley last year scored more touchdowns, and I expect much of the same this year. I don't know why you're laughing. I'm being serious.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay. And I think the number 2 part is that Shipley is more of a factor in the receiving game. So I expect that to balance out a little bit. So with my number 2 pick, I had to go with Will Shipley.
Hey, Les.
Hey, Matt.
You know how you mentioned Arkansas there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm picking Rocket Raheem Sanders 3rd overall. So there you go. We were thinking the same way.
Real quick, before you go into your reasoning why you drafted Rocket Raheem Sanders, when I put his name down and post it later, should I post it as Raheem Sanders or Rocket Sanders?
Either way, man. Anytime
I'm going Rocket Sanders. Got a blast.
That's rocket power, man. He's woogity.
Hey, yes, sir.
He's gonna do that. But yeah, the reason why 6.5 yards per carry, 1,400 yards on the ground, 10 touchdowns in the SEC last year. That's pretty good. And I mean, he's going to be just the same. Arkansas's offense is pretty run heavy anyway. I absolutely love Rocket Raheem Sanders out of Arkansas with my 3rd overall pick.
Well, now that you picked Rocket Sanders, I have to look at my draft board, make some adjustments real quick. But no need to fear because I have a plan. And I'm going to officially pick my wide receiver position. And it's going to be a guy that I know all too well because he absolutely lit our secondary up in the bowl game last year. This is a guy that is a receiver in a very high potent passing offense, by a head coach that Matt and I know all too well. We love all too well. And a quarterback that Matt and I also know and love all too well. And I'm
Is
going to
this
go with
becoming a
Rome
Taylor
Adu.
Swift podcast?
Do what?
Is this becoming a Taylor Swift podcast? You keep saying all too well.
You know what? I hear those tickets are hard to come by.
They
And you know
are.
what? Maybe a shout out from the Less is More Sports podcast is becoming just as hard to come by.
It's true.
But for my first wide receiver position, I'm going to go with Rome Odunze of Washington, a guy that had an absolutely great statistical season last year, and another year in that system is going to absolutely tear it up. So I say it again, my first receiver is going to be Rome Odunze from Washington.
While you take care of your other receiver, I'm going to go ahead and grab my second running back. I talked about him ad nauseum in our cap or no cap segment. So if you watch last week's episode, you knows where this is going. But I'm going to take Quinshawn Judkins of Ole Miss. 9.7 yards or 9.7 5.7 yards per carry, 1,500 total yards on the ground last year, and 16 touchdowns in an offense where the quarterback situation is unsettled. He can catch, he can run, he can play pretty damn well. I'm going to go with Quinshawn Judkins as my secondary running back.
A very, very solid pick as well. And, Matt and I are apparently more on the same page today than we are normal podcasts. So he's really making me work for each pick. So I'm evaluating my draft board and I'm seeing a lot of players I think I could pick or some that I maybe should wait on. But deciding, I think I have it.
All right.
And I think that I'm going to go with a second wide receiver, a guy that I also think is going to have a really good season this year. And for the first time in my list, he's a guy that is, let me recheck my list just to make sure I'm not saying anything wrong. Yeah, for the first time on my list, I'm going with a guy who is playing for a new school this year. I'm going with a guy that was very productive at his former school, but is entering a more high potent offense with a more high potent quarterback playing in a, dare I say, less defensive league, maybe. And my second receiver is going to be Dorian Singer for USC.
I like that pick. I mean, like you said, that's a transition from a league that was okay to going to the Pac-12 where it's a little less stringent defensively. Yeah, you're totally right there. And I think that like obviously with Caleb Williams running the show, he's going to get some looks. And with Jerry Rice's son on the other side of the field, you're probably going to work yourself into more than a few open opportunities. So that's going to be a solid pickup for the USC Trojans. Another big portal get for them. And I mean, I think is what if we're as high on USC as we think we are, then that's going to be one of the key reasons they get to possibly the college football playoff.
Absolutely.
All right, Les. I feel like I've tortured you enough by surprising you with taking SEC players. So for my second wide receiver pick, I'm going to go to a school that's got friends of the program or had friends of the program at it. And I'm going to take Malachi Corley of Western Kentucky. The Hilltoppers make an appearance in my draft.
Ooh.
And for those of you guys playing along at home, you may be a little bit like, well, why would you take Malachi Corley here? Let me go through some of these stats from 2022. He had 101 catches, 1,295 yards, a nation-leading 975 yards after the catch, and 40 missed tackles. He caused 40 missed tackles. And he's still got the same quarterback, and he's still playing in a pretty open league. So for my second wide receiver pick, Malachi Corey from the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers.
That is a good sleeper pick. And you know what? even though my name is not Matthew Berry, we are giving some Matthew Berry-esque insight on on a fictional college football fantasy draft, and I absolutely love it.
It's what we
Um,
do.
and I'm going to wrap this next picked up with my flex position, and I don't think it'll come as any surprise. As you all know, Matt is usually higher on wide receivers. I'm usually higher on running backs if you pay attention to any narratives within the show. So with my flex position, I'm going to go with a third running back. And, Ohio State kicked off this podcast with the number one overall pick. And Ohio State is going to be this pick in our college football fantasy draft, but it's not going to be who you may think. Ohio State has a good problem to have. They have an absolutely loaded running back room. But the one that I like the best, and let me tell you, I was watching the spring game. This guy was an absolute beast last year, scoring a lot of touchdowns. And I watched him in the spring game, and he looked like he completely just redefined his body. He looks like a refrigerator with legs out there. And I'm going to go with Mayan Williams for my flex position. And yeah, a guy that I know is going to score a lot of touchdowns this year. So obviously going to be a good pick when it comes to that. So my flex position is going to be Mayan Williams.
That's a good pick. And I think, what do I want to do now? I'm debating. I think I'm going to wait and go ahead and pick my defense last.
Oh, ballsy.
Yes, it's a bit early, but I'm still debating on what other option I want for my flex. And I also need to look up quickers real quick because I forgot about kickers. Whoopsie daisy. So for my defense list, what's another running bit we have on the show? What's another running bit? A team we like to make a team we like to make fun of a lot.
Ooh, I like it. I like where this is going.
You know where it's going, Les.
Is it?
Since 2018, there's only been one defense that's been in the same league as Georgia when it comes to points allowed. Since 2017, this team leads the FBS in turnovers gained at 176. They're in it every year. We kind of make fun of them for it, but my God, do they come up with stops when you need them? How about them Hawkeyes?
Iowa.
We're going with Iowa. We're playing the percentages and going with the Iowa defense. And before everyone just says, well, you're going by percentages, I have reasoning. Reason number one, Cooper DeJean, really good cover cornerback. Reason number two, Deontay Craig anchors the front line. They're going to be a really good defense this year. They're in the Big Ten West where, there are good teams, but there are also several bottom 15 teams. Looking at you, Northwestern, and maybe Nebraska, depending on how quickly Matt Rule's infectious attitude takes over. But for the time being, they've been stalwarts for 5 years. They've been stalwarts for 6 years. They keep on going. And their coordinator was one of my top picks to be one of the top coordinators in the country. Why not go with a defensive forces a lot of turnovers with the Iowa Hawkeyes?
That is a very good, insightful pick because I think most people watching this podcast, if they were ready to pick their defense, Iowa may not be the first team that pops into their head. But obviously, women lie, men lie, but numbers don't. Matt had the facts ready to go and showing why Iowa, because they major in a special category in takeaways, is exactly why they are a very, very highly sought of fantasy football defensive prospect. So you know what, Matt? I think you might be a ringer right now because you say that you don't know a lot about fantasy football, but your input is showing otherwise. So, I think you are like putting on your Johnny Knoxville impersonation and becoming a complete ringer. Even though we're not ringing the Special Olympics, I still like the job you're doing. Have you ever seen that? Okay, please tell me you get that reference.
I do. I understand I understand.
I get it. Okay, good. Because hopefully, not too many people don't understand that reference, and they're like, "Why did Les just name drop the Special Olympics?"
Yes, we're canceling this show right now.
Apparently, even though Even though I've worked with special needs kids, and I think special needs people are the absolute most beautiful people on the planet, and
I got what
they are the purest people. So obviously, we are not getting canceled anytime soon. We are making a movie reference, you weirdos. So, anyways, watch some what?
watch some Jackass for once in your life, you stupid kids.
Oh, that was the worst show ever, but that's neither here nor there. It was absolutely awful. Like I never like got in so much pain watching a show in my life than watching Jackass.
Yeah,
I
I
feel like that
felt
was the point, though.
yeah, that was the point. But man, it really made you feel something when you were watching Jackass.
It made me feel like I was smarter than I thought.
Yeah, that's true. But those guys have millions of dollars, and where are we?
Doing a podcast that, yeah, we don't even receive revenue off of at this time. Maybe one day.
Where's my burrito? Okay,
Anyways,
let's
I think it's time to
just think
pick
about
my.
that.
I think it's time to pick my quarterback, and I think I'm going to shock the world by not picking Caleb Williams. And even though
Okay.
that I think Caleb Williams is great, and I think he's going to have a great season, how hypocritical would I be as not only a podcast host, but doing this fictional fantasy college football draft and not pick the guy that I have winning the Heisman Trophy this year in the preseason? And as I mentioned on our Cap or No Cap episode, this guy's got the best offensive line in the Sark era. There's not as much emphasis on the running game, even though the running game will be pretty good. And he's got all kinds of weapons to throw to. And my quarterback position is going to be Quinn Ewers of Texas. Hook 'em horns, baby. And to top it off, if he doesn't perform, because he knows he's going to need to perform, because if he doesn't, you got Malik Murphy and Arch Manning waiting in the balance. So that's all kinds of pressure to step his game up. And he also ended the season on a high note last year. So I'm going with Quinn Ewers as my quarterback.
That's a good pick. I'm going to do something potentially unorthodox. I don't know if you can legally do this, Les, but I'm going to try it for my flex position. You will not believe what I'm going to do right here because how would you feel if I told you I'm going to take the guy who went #1 overall's tandem mate right now? I'm taking Emeka Ibuka. I'm doing it. 15.6 yards per carry, over 1,500 receiving yards,
Per catch.
74 receptions, and 10 touchdowns. What's that, Les?
Per catch, not per carry.
Per catch. Not per carry, yes, I'm sorry. And why am I doing this? Well, the way I see it, Les, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is having a bad game, you've got another guy who's probably going to be a potential top 20 pick in the NFL draft on the other side of the field. The ball's got to go somewhere. And either way, I'm going to be winning because I'm going to have two incredible guys on either side of the ball ready to go. So, yes, I'm doing something rather unorthodox and taking a teammate of another guy in Emeka Igbuka with my flex pick because why not?
I mean, like you said, if Marvin Harrison Jr. has a bad game, Emeka Ibuka will pick up the slack. So I see the logic there.
I'm just
Not
having fun now.
yeah, not completely unorthodox. And ironically enough, you're doing a very similar strategy as what I'm doing with my next pick.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So it's time for me to officially take my tight end position. And as you know, I said one of the reasons why I picked Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman is all these weapons he has to throw the ball. And I'm going to go with a guy that he has already shown to have great chemistry with, and a guy that I expect to catch a lot of touchdowns, rack up a lot of points in college football fantasy. And that is Jatavion JT Sanders as my tight end position.
I like that one.
Let's be honest, Matt. Have you not liked any of my picks? I feel
No,
like you said I like that pick. I like that pick. Every pick.
that's a good thing about college football is that there's so many players to choose from that you're just like, ooh, I love that guy. But I also like my guy. But I love that guy too because college football is fun that way.
Absolutely.
So yeah, of course I love all of them. It's because I love these guys. They're playing for all kinds of awesome stuff all across the country. And Les, it's time for me to select my kicker. And so
You
I'm
haven't even
saving
taken your quarterback yet, and you're selecting a kicker?
I'm selecting my kicker, and now and then I'm going to pick my quarterback. So just hold off. You've already got yours off the board, so I know my guy is safe. Les, it's been a rough go in Palo Alto. It's been rough. Stanford, not in the Pac-12 anymore. Pac-12's gone. Big Ten, ACC, Mountain West. Who knows where they're going? But they do have one bright spot, and that is their kicker, Joshua Carty of Stanford. Made all 18 field goal attempts last season. Was an all Pac 12 guy, only missed 1 point after attempt. All Pac 12, like I said, Lou Groza Award finalist. Hit a 54-yarder against BYU. Maybe the best kicker in the country. Joshua Carty of Stanford is my kicking pick because Stanford's probably going to be kicking a lot of field goals.
That's the first pick of this draft that I actually was planning to take this guy,
Oh
and you took him.
no!
And that's a good thing. That's what you want to do. That is that okay. Now you're showing your noviceness in fantasy football because that's what you want to do. You want to pick. It's one of those things like Pain and Gain, the movie where he goes, "I don't just want everything you have. I want you not to have it." So yeah,
Oh,
that's you got to be cutthroat like that in fantasy football. So no, that's
good
actually a good
lord!
thing on your part. So be proud of it. Embrace it. Embrace the pain and the gain.
Oh my god!
And I guess it's time for me to pick my defense. And I'm going to go with a safe pick here. A team that's had one of, if not the best defense the last several seasons. Two-time defending national champions. And as I've said on this podcast, who is going to be the Alabama of this decade, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs. I feel like it's just a safe pick here, and I'm going to go ahead and just take it for my defense.
Safe picks are always a good option. They are. Lesser, are you excited now? Because it's
I
time
am
for
excited.
it's finally time for me to pick my quarterback, Les. And I thought about it. There are a lot of good quarterbacks this year. There's Michael Penix. There's Caleb Williams. There's Drake May. There's Jordan Francis. There's Cade Klubnik, whose name still eludes me. There are a lot of exciting young prospects coming into play. But I do have memories of being a child, Les. And when the end of the year would roll around, the top passing guys in touchdowns and yards in college football weren't ever those Heisman winners or those guys playing in a national championship game. It was Brandon Doty. It was Colt Brennan. It was Case Keenum. It was somebody you never heard of who was always carving up like crazy and would go in the second round or third round, play a couple preseason games, maybe be a good backup and done. And so, Les, I propose to you a dual threat quarterback who I'm absolutely in love with. My quarterback will be Frank Harris of the UTSA Roadrunners. The UTSA Roadrunners. And Les, I know what you're thinking. You're probably a little bit confused right now. Let's go through some stats, Les. Last year, 2022, 4,059 yards, 32 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Pretty good, pretty good. But let's look at his rushing stats. Oh, there are some rushing stats. 128 carries for 600 yards, 4.7 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns, with his longest rushing touchdown being 63 yards. That dude is just so much fun to watch. The UTSA offense will be so much fun to watch. I'm going with Frank Harris of the UTSA Roadrunners, a dual threat who's got speed, plays in one of those small conferences where they emphasize the fun. I'm going with Frank Harris of the UTSA Roadrunners to be my fantasy quarterback because that's just how it rolls.
You know what? I think we are going to surprise the world that neither one of us have Caleb Williams or Drake May as our quarterbacks.
That is true.
And you know what? I think that's just going to make it all the more interesting to see who we picked. I think those who watch the podcast will get like really blown away who my number one overall pick was because I had a very similar strategy to what you used with your quarterback. And I guess it's time now to finally pick my kicker, my last position. And oh yeah, Matt, your roster's done.
Yep,
I just kind of lost track of where we were at for a second, but no, it is finally time for me to pick my kicker. And I'm going to go with a guy who was all Big 12 last year in special teams. He only missed one field goal in his 9 field goal attempts inside the 40-yard line. And, you know, he's got a season high 54-yarder in the win over Iowa State. And I'm going to go with Griffin Kell of TCU as my kicker.
I feel like a lot of people forget about him, unfortunately. Despite the fact he is pretty good.
Yeah.
He's one of the few Scots TCU's got coming back, too. That's a big advantage.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it pretty much has their roster is a complete turnover from the national title team. But at least they got the kicker back.
They got the kicker.
They got Harmon from Blue Mountain State back.
I forgot about that joke. Well, Les, do you want to see this? We can talk for a second here. We got about 6.5 minutes left to talk about some of the guys who are on the draft board who didn't come off, but are guys I expect to be pretty good breakout candidates. Jacob Cowing of Arizona, wide receiver, 85 catches last year, 1,034 yards, and 4 100-yard games. J. Michael Sturdivant, he's a guy who's transferred into UCLA from Cal, and last year at Cal, who was abysmal, he had 65 catches for 755 yards. Running back Frank Gore Jr., another son of an NFL great I had on the draft board, 1.6 yards per carry, 1,382 yards, 9 touchdowns, and a guy who I almost used a flex on him. But number one, I'm not sure exactly where he's playing this year because ESPN was no help, and I'm not exactly sure. And that's Sado Torre from Mississippi State, the big tight end from Arkansas State. It says he's going to Mississippi State. I saw Colorado. I think it's Mississippi State, though. 13.1 yards per catch, 50 catches with 655 yards and 14 touchdowns. And now he's playing with Will Rogers, who nearly threw for 4,000 yards at quarterback at Mississippi State. So those are some of the guys I had on the draft board that I ended up not taking. Do you have anybody you'd like to shout out before we kind of put a bow on this thing?
No, I don't really have anybody that was ready to shout out. I mean, I feel like, the guys that I was looking at, I think were a lot of the guys that were probably in most college football fantasy drafts would have been picked. I want to shout out the Florida State fan that commented. That was the first comment on this tweet yesterday when I asked who the number one overall pick was, and they picked Trey Benson. There's obviously so many good players that we could have picked. I mean, with how many weapons Texas has this year, I could have literally made a whole Texas team in my fantasy football. I don't know
I almost picked Xavier Worthy with that flex spot.
Xavier Worthy is going to be a great option. A.D. Mitchell is going to be a great option, and Isaiah Nayor could be a very sleepy pick as well. Obviously, it's not a my segment without talking about how great Riley Leonard's going to be this year. So
yeah, I was kind of surprised you didn't go with him. A slightly easier league. It's just because Mike Elko's more of a defensive-minded coach, or did you?
No, it's because I felt like it would be very hypocritical if I'm predicting Quinn Ewers to win the Heisman and I don't pick him if I have the opportunity at quarterback.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But, I would have understood. I mean, from what I've understood, the point of fantasy football is put up numbers, not to necessarily prove back your takes up.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I think Quinn Ewers is going to put up a lot of numbers. We look at the last really elite passer in a Steve Sarkisian system that had weapons like what Quinn Ewers is going to have this year. And, not only was he in the Heisman contention for most of the year, I mean, he had the most efficient passing season of all time. We're talking about Mac Jones. Yeah. And I think Quinn Ewers is more talented than Mac Jones, but of course, talent only goes so far playing the quarterback position.
Yep.
Also, Quinn Ewers is kind of still in an easy, somewhat defensive league. I mean, the Big 12, we've often called it a flag football conference on this show many times. So, yeah, I think with the amount of weapons he's going to have and, his second year in the system, I expect him just to like take off this year. So I would have loved to take Riley Leonard. I was debating on it because Riley Leonard is more of a threat on the ground for, obviously anyone who's watched him at all can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Really great athlete at the quarterback position. But, obviously as we got 3 minutes to go, I'm how you feeling about your team? I'm feeling pretty good about mine.
I really like mine. And another thing I'm noticing too, Les, that will endure us to most of the Deep South is no Alabama players for us.
Well, you know how I feel about Alabama.
I know. I know I feel kind of bad, but it's like I just couldn't think. I know there are going to be playmakers at Alabama. Like I could have gone with Jace McClellan. I think he's another sleeper pick guy for me, but he was the guy. He was the only guy who I really considered for a bit as being a flex option was Jace McClellan. So, not to say Alabama is bad or anything by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that shows just how deeply talented we are at positions across the country this year. That we're not totally focused on the big boys, even if we did take guys from Ohio State and Georgia. There are teams like Arkansas and Ole Miss who have really, really effective guys hiding on their rosters. And like I said, I don't know much about fantasy drafting, but after you kind of told me about after you kind of made fun of me for taking Calvin Johnson with all-time draft, I was like, I just might as well get dudes who I think are going to get gains out there on the field. So I was just kind of like, these dudes looked great last year. I expect them to stay good this year. Let's see where that rolls.
I mean, that's a very fair point. And yeah, I feel like if there actually was a college football fantasy draft each season, the mid-major guys would be the ones like at the top of the draft boards because
Yeah, yeah.
they're going to be playing. Yeah, they're going to be the ones putting up like ungodly numbers like in competition. So
That's part of the fun of it. You get to shine the spotlight on some dude because my other quarterback on the big board, because when you sent me before the show, Les texted me, he's like, I'm taking a page out of your playbook for my first pick. I thought you were going to take Frank Harris, and I was like, uh-oh. So I looked up Austin Reed's stats for Western Kentucky. He's a 4,000-yard passer himself, and I'm like, I think he threw 30 touchdowns last year, and I'm like, or no, not 30. Hold on,
there's
there's
more than
more.
that.
There's more than that. I have it on the notepads on the big board. 40 touchdowns and 4,700 yards, and I was like, that'll be a suffice backup. But I wanted Harris for the running ability. But yeah, it would be incredible to see just like how many mid-major guys would go in the first round.
Absolutely. But that is all the time we have for today. As always, like and subscribe to Less is More Sports YouTube and Spotify channel to get updates on our newest content. Follow our social media pages on Facebook and Twitter. And until next time, tell us what you think about our picks. Tell me who you all would draft at the number one overall pick. And until next time, Matt and I are officially out. I guess we got to start on basketball now.
I guess so. Oh no.
Till
More
next time, guys.
more mid majors.
Dun dun dun.
They're coming.